So you're at the Cowardly Lion for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
So then we're into about 74 when you go to
73, 74.
when you go to Cabaret.
Right.
Cabaret's on Lansdowne Street. We've
Right.
heard a few people talk about Cabaret, but you're probably the first person who...
Jimmy Fournier and myself were the first two DJs at Cabaret.
And describe who opened Cabaret.
The manager was Eddie Catino, now living in Florida, still a friend of mine.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I think he still bartends. God love him.
Yeah.
But great guy. He was the manager of Cabaret.
Uh-huh. So you are asked to go to Cabaret, and how many, was it 7 night a week?
It was open 7 nights a week. I played, I think, 2 or 3, and Jimmy played the other.
And was it, I believe Stephen, or was it Conrad, talked about the booth
played.
setup?
The booth at Cabaret was, after dark, was a horror show.
Yeah.
It was made out of lead pipes. That, to me, it looked like a Christmas tree ornament. The outline of a Christmas tree ornament, suspended from the ceiling about 15 feet above the dance floor. You had a fire escape ladder you had to pull down and to climb up. And you had to get your records up there. I used to have a backpack. I used to put this big, huge backpack on my back, put my records in the backpack to climb up, and then you pulled the ladder up. So behind you. It was a plywood floor. They had a 24-channel Tascam mixing board, which is a professional mixing board, because the club before Cabaret, it was the Tea Party, which was a rock and roll band club. Right. You know, 10 Years After played there. I saw 10 Years After. I saw several other bands there. And we used to use that Tascam board as the mixer. There were no walls on this DJ booth, so you could very easily, literally, fall out of it.
Yeah.
It was a nightmare.
So it was felt a little dangerous.
It was very dangerous.
Yeah.
It was very dangerous.
Now, is that, I think Conrad told us a story about Dana himself hurting himself trying to get into that booth, right? He broke his hand?
Dana hurt himself after that. They had removed that DJ booth when 15 Lansdowne Street opened. Okay. And the booth was up in the far left-hand corner of the club, overlooking the dance floor. But they had these grates that used to come down, like these grates they put on the windows, security grates, to keep people out of the DJ booth and away from the equipment. And they used to put them down at night, and that's how Dana hurt his finger. Okay,
so that was the same location?
Yes.
It's just that it would become 15 minutes down after.
It went from, if memory serves me right, it went from the Tea Party, the Cabaret After Dark, 15 Lansdowne Street, Boston, City. And then it was that one, right? And then, no. Metro. Metro. The Cabaret After Dark Cabaret Club was located next door to, Cabaret. It was the biggest club in the city. Yeah. I mean, the dance floor is at least 2,500 square feet. So, but Cabaret doesn't last very long as Cabaret. No, it doesn't at all, no. About like a year, maybe? About a year. Okay. Right. And the decor is sort of left over from the days of the Tea Party, right? Yep. It's very psychedelic looking still, kind of? Cement walls, acoustics were horrible. Yeah. And when that room was empty, because what would happen is people would go there and they go into the cabaret to see the cabaret act. Yeah. Which was Randy Lee, who was Wayland Flowers. Kyle Russell, Glenn Elliott, and Michael Greer. Those were the acts of Michael Greer or Greer? Greer. Okay. Greer. Okay. Now, Wayland Flowers surprised me to find out that Wayland Flowers actually was a local act first, before he went out to, I guess, L.A., right? Is that what ended up happening? Yeah. Was he just... So how long was he in Boston for? He was in Boston for quite a while, because he would be in P-Town as well. Right, during the summer with Madam, okay. and what was the other one? Crazy Mary. So he had more than one puppet. But at 3 that I remember: Crazy Mary, Madam, and Joe. I forget. It was an old guy who came with a J.
But Madam was the one
Madam
that was the real star.
Right.
And that's who we ended up taking and doing more out in L.A. with and all that stuff. Okay.
And Michael Greer actually was in a couple of movies. One he played Queenie was Fortune in Men's Eyes.
I've heard of the movie. Yeah.
You should see that. It came out right after Boys in the Band, and it's about prison. He played Queenie, this drag queen in prison.
Interesting. So what was the drag scene like then? Like, I guess it makes me sort of think about like how many, like, was it as far as performers go? I mean, Michael sang in his own voice, right? Or no, it was Brandy Lee.
Brandy Lee sang her. Brandy Lee was a big hit at Cabaret because she used her own voice to sing. She had her own hair. She never transitioned.
Transitioned over? No, she was always
She's she lived as a woman. Yeah. A man living as a woman, and she had long, straight hair.
Yeah. She
was very convincing, and because she sang and used her own voice.
And that was an anomaly, sort of.
It was because it was mostly, lip sync.
It was still lip syncing mostly even then.
Right.
Okay, so lip syncing was a part of the whole culture very early on.
Yeah.
But were there a lot of drag performers like in the clubs in general, or was it mostly at Cabaret?
It was mostly at the other side in Jocks.
In Jocks.
Right.
So now, concurrent with Cabaret, other bars that are open at the same time, did you go to a lot of those places in your off time, like Sporters?
Not really, no.
Not really Sporters?
I like music.
So Sporters was not really a music place.
I mean, I could count on my hand the number of times I was in Sporters. Okay. Eventually, they did have a DJ and a dance floor, but it was...
but it was not your favorite. No. How about the 1270?
1270 I went to a lot.
You did? Because obviously your friends were working there. Jimmy was there.
Right.
Dana was there by then?
No. Well, Jimmy started there downstairs.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, Stephen spent some time talking about this. Now, Stephen traces a lot of the evolution of disco
to 12,
as we came to know it
to 1270.
To Jimmy and the 12 and the basement.
Because that was his first exposure to it.
Okay, but so where do you sort of trace it? I mean, I guess it's hard to sort of pin down because it was kind of happening at the same time in a few places. Right. But Jimmy was a pioneer in some respects, though, right? I mean, in terms of like how he was putting it together.
Yeah, Jimmy was, we were all friends. We hung out together. We ate together. I mean, Jimmy would get up in the morning and come over to West Newton Street, where Dana and I lived, after the mailman came, because we'd wait for the mailman to see what little presents he was going to bring, as far as records were concerned.
Yeah.
And he would come over our house. We hung out together.
So there's all these ideas are happening. You're all discussing all these things.
Right. I had gone out and I found a receiver that had a dual volume control. One controlled the right and one controlled the left. It was on the same knob. And I went out and I bought 2 turntables and took the reject spindles out of them and broke pencils off and put the end of pencils on to use as a spindle. And we would practice up in my room on this contraption, literally, with the records we would get that day, seeing what this would go with, what that would go with, and what we could blend with what. It was frustrating because they were, the turntables would reject when the tone arm got to a certain point. So it wasn't like you could take the tone, lift the tone arm, put it at the end of the record to try to do your mix. You had to set it in the middle and let the record play on its own until,
It had that auto feature.
It had that auto reject feature that you couldn't disconnect.
So obviously there's no kind of like pitch control or anything yet. There's no speed controls or any of that stuff yet.
Nothing. As Stephen said, what ended up happening is once, Jimmy played downstairs at the 1270. His DJ booth was on a stage with the piano, as Stephen had mentioned, and he had his own turntables, and back then the only commercial turntable that had any real torque to it was a Thorns.
Yeah. And
Jimmy had a pair of Thorns that he brought into the 1270, and he played on. He used an old Aztec tube-fed, tube-powered mixer.
Right.
You had to turn it on and warm the thing up. No cueing.
Right.
He cued over the speakers. He cued over the system.
Just enough to hear it.
He would turn the volume on, put the needle on the record, and I could hear it. I could hear him because I would know what he was doing.
And for people who don't know exactly what we're talking about in terms of DJ,
cueing.
Now you cue a record in your headphones. The record that you want to play, you're sort of lining up and cueing in a set of headphones so that the audience can't hear what you're cueing up. Then there was no such thing, so he was actually queuing up a record live on the other turntable while the other song is playing.
Right.
Right. So you can hear that scratch or whatever he's doing to try and line it up. Okay. So,
I would hear it all the time.
Right.
You know,
but necessity just dictated that was what he had to do.
And back then, because, you know, album cuts, it was very difficult to read a record. I don't know if you played vinyl enough.
I did, yeah.
You can read a record. It's very difficult to read an album because the tracks are so compressed together. So what we used to do, and especially when Stephen was explaining how Jimmy would reblend this one song and make the crowd wild, that song was "Love Is the Message."
Right.
And he would bring that song in where that violin would come in, and then it would break down into the song, and everyone would just go crazy. And he would do that over and over and over. Well, how did you find that spot in the middle of the song? Because it was literally in the middle of the record. He used to take a pencil and make a little pencil mark on the vinyl itself.
Yeah.
So we knew where that spot was.
And the pencil mark would stay.
We'd have to redo it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 copies of the record.
Yep.
So when is 2 copies of the record to make your own extensions and all that? That's all happening right around then too,
Yep.
And everybody's kind of doing that at the same time.
I think that started. Yeah, I think it started when we, you know, instrumental and vocal on the flip side of 45.
Right.
That started it.
Right.
And that started us lining up songs.
Yeah.
So
like
that
BPM and
no, we weren't even doing BPM then.
Okay.
It was all on the instrumentation. We focused. I think Stephen was one of the first ones to start with the BPMing. We all did it by ear and by feel. But you know, when we would try to line up, play an instrumental and a vocal and instrumental together, we would do it on the instrumentation, on the orchestration,
on the sounds.
Right.
Now, some DJs were more intuitive about what keys songs were in. Was anybody thinking about this, mixing songs that were in complementary keys or any of that kind of music, like theory of any kind?
Not at all.